Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. With patch 11.1 finally here with the season 2 rolling right around the corner, I thought it'd be a good idea to do some of the more updated rogue guides for season 2. As the class itself isn't seeing major updates going forward, which gives us a much better idea of where the class is looking like in terms of their builds and playstyles going forward. Essentially, not a lot is changing from season 1 heading into season 2, but I still wanted to give you guys a comprehensive guide regarding how to pick up and play Assassination Rogue, a fan favorite, heading into this brand new update to make sure that you get the best output within season 2 Mythic Plus dungeons and the liberation of the Undermine raid tier, covering talents, basic gameplay and rotation, the openers, which are going to be super important for Assassination Rogues, enchants, consumables, crafted gear, but also some of the best slot items that you should look out for at the start of a new season. I will also have a written version of this guide in our Discord channel, which you can find in the description, together with some of the other towns that you will be able to import directly into the game to get yourself started and playing your rogue immediately. But definitely check out our Discord version of the guide, as it's going to have up-to-date changes if you see any future tuning right as Season 2 launches. As always, if you guys want to see more regular class updates for the patch 11.1, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Starting out with a fan favorite spec of Assassination, and the patch 11.1 doesn't actually bring the spec too many new things. In fact, Assassination is going to be a lot more familiar to you if you played it in Season 1, since there's no major changes, just some tuning numbers and a tier, so they just passively buffs your damage. You don't really have to learn too much or relearn too much when it comes to playing the spec. This can be great for players that are just looking for consistency and don't want to have to relearn their favorite playstyle. But if you were looking for something new, then Assassination is not one of those specs that's going to be changing things up too much. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but it should still be a fairly strong option within Season 2, as it has still the one of the few specs with uncapped AoE while maintaining fantastic focus damage, and it's a powerhouse when it comes to pure single target and burst damage with its Deathmark Kingsbane windows. Usually I like to begin my guides by going over the talent builds first, and that's exactly what I'm going to start off with, going over the raid builds as well as Mythic Plus builds, and for the most part, they didn't really change too much. And all of the builds I'll have both in the description of this video for you to copy and import directly into the game, so you can just paste the actual import string and then name it whatever you like to. But also you can check out our Discord channel where we'll have a written version of the guide with all of the builds for you to rip from the guide directly into your game. And I'll try to keep those builds up to date in case a new build potentially comes up in the future. But right now, most builds are going to be reliant around the Deathstalker hero spec. The pure single target raiding build is going to go heavily into Supercharger, so you're going to be fishing for some really strong Envenom damage. Although you're not playing into the Envenom damage, you're just passively going to buff that output. And the rest of the Assassination kit is very standard with internal bleeding, double charges on your Shiv, going into Kingsbane, artillery precision, and double poisons with dragon tempered blades. It's a very standard build. It is going to be the best choice when you go into raid encounters where you only have a single target. If you're cleaving multiple targets, you'll be adjusting that build ever so slightly. You can make a separate build or use the same build for raids, just replacing a single talent. If you're hitting just one target, internal bleeding is what you're playing into. If you're ever hitting more than one target, but you're in a raid setting where boss damage is of utmost priority, you'll be picking up Caustic Spatter, which will allow you single target damage, your Kingsbane, Envenoms, poison applications to cleave nearby targets that are around the boss, which offers some of the best free damage for Assassination with barely giving up any single target output on a boss, which allows Assassination to have this strong focus damage within raid content. For Mythic Plus dungeons, you'll have a couple of different builds. This is the standard quote-unquote build for Mythic Plus that focuses on more single target damage while having quite a bit of AoE, but also picks up a little bit of utility if you're looking to push some of the higher level dungeons. It picks up at least 1 point into Supercharger, 2 points into Lethality. It goes with a Numbing Poison, but you can swap into a Trophic Poison if your group requires that instead. Numbing Poison usually will just affect the effectiveness of melee attackers and casters, which can sometimes be a little bit easier for your tanks to manage. You pick up quite a bit of AoE with Crimson Tempest and being able to spread your bleeds with Indiscriminate Carnage, but You do sacrifice some offensive power with Master Assassin to pick up things like Iron Wire to apply a 50% damage reduction on enemies while also silencing them, which could be amazing if you're trying to use Vanishes potentially as a utilitarian button, or if you're trying to have an opener to be able to lock down casters so your tank can have an easier time grouping them together. This build offers decent AoE damage and very strong single target damage. Though if you're looking for more damage but sacrificing some of the utility, can also play the Subterfuge version of the build, which allows you to use Vanish a little bit more aggressively, allows you Vanish to last a little bit longer, all the effects that grant you a stealth buff, so even things like your Master Assassin are extended to 12 seconds, granting you additional critical strike chance, and this build has a little bit more single target through Twist the Knife, but it is mostly focused on big AoE damage that you can use in the opener, bleeding up all targets while cleaving them down. And like I said, all of those builds will be available in the description, but also in our Discord channel, updated regularly in case new builds arise as we head into this brand new season. When it comes to hero specs, for the most part, Assassination is going to be sticking with the trusty Deathstalker playstyle. It has been a strong one and plays around only a handful of mechanics like Cleave the Witness, where you want to use Phantom Eyes in single target, as well as your Lingerer Darkness, which allows you to use Shiv a little bit more aggressively after Deathmark expires, but also the main one, Darkest Night. The only mechanic you really have to watch out with Deathstalker is to ambush at the start to apply at Deathstalker's mark, but once you consume 3 finishers to consume those Deathstalker mark charges, you get yourself the capstone of Darkest Night, causing your Venom to be a giga hit, guaranteed crit, lots of damage, and reapply Deathstalker's mark, so you just gotta make sure you're reapplying to the right target that's likely going to live for a very long time. Usually you put it on your focus target, the target that used to be taken out as quickly as possible. But if you ever for some reason lose a Deathstalker mark on a target and you can't vanish to ambush a target, that can cause it to run into some issues. Deathstalker is not a difficult playstyle, but some players don't really like the amount of effects and buffs you have to manage with, and we're wondering if it's possible to play Fatebound. Technically, if for some reason you're having trouble picking up Deathstalker, which is not the most difficult hero spec, but if you struggle with it, Fatebound is a viable alternative. The damage does is not as good as Deathstalker, but it's really not behind by much. It's a viable, perfectly good option that's a little bit more passive with a Hand of Fate. Every time you use a finisher at 5 comp points or more, flip a coin, either increasing your damage or doing direct damage to the enemy target. It's a strong playstyle and it continues to be a viable choice. However, you will have to find a way to adjust your talent points a little bit, as you have to play with the talent of Inevitable Fate, or Inevitable End, which includes that you need to find talent points to pick up Cold Blood as well. You need those talents in order to make Fatebound work, but if you're someone who's looking to play Assassination but are not a fan of Deathstalker, maybe just going back to the game or just going back to Assassination, and you just want to play a more passive option that deals decent damage, Fatebound is a perfectly viable alternative. Next, let's go over the playstyle and the rotation of Assassination Rogue, which hasn't changed too much since Season 1. We're still a comp point builder spender type of a class, looking to build our comp points as quickly and efficiently as possible, and we try to avoid overcapping on resources, being both comp points as well as energy. As a bleed-based class, we try to maintain bleeds on our targets at all times, since our bleeds are linked to how we regenerate energy. So you want to maintain bleeds, which are debuff management, but also a buff of Slice and Dice, which is also another thing you'll have to watch out for. And as a burst class, we usually try to synchronize our major big damage cooldowns together for maximum effectiveness. So you'll have to maintain the cooldowns of those abilities and try to use them basically always, whenever they are available. So you don't really need to hold them back, but you do usually want to synchronize them together as best as possible. Before our combat scenario, since we were running the talent of Dragon Temporal Blades, we can apply 2 lethal and non-lethal poisons. Your lethal poisons are going to be always Deadly Poison and Amplifying Poison, but for non-lethals, you're going to be using Crippling, Numbing, or if you're talented into Atrophic, that's going to be replacing Numbing instead. And the basics of Assassination Rogue are pretty straightforward. You want to open up with an ambush as a Deathstalker to at least begin the Deathstalker Deathmark loop. But once you're in there, you want to maintain Slice and Dice, which you mostly maintain passively through Envenoms. You maintain Corrode at all times and Rupture with at least 5 column points on a single target. And for the most part, you're trying to use your major combat abilities as often as possible. So things like Cold Blood, keep it on cooldown. Deathmark, which usually synergizes together with Vanish to get an improved Garrote, which is a stronger version of Garrote on a target that can be amplified through Deathmark, doubling up on it. also should be used together generally. Kingsbane should also be used on cooldown together with Shivs and Thistle to amplify its damage. Kingsbane does have a 1 minute cooldown, however, so you'll initially be able to, in the opener, synchronize Deathmark and Kingsbane together, but then you'll have to use Kingsbane by itself, and then it'll resynchronize as long as you keep in both of these abilities on cooldown every 2 minutes. So you'll have a full burst, then a 1 minute Kingsbane, then 2 minute burst of both of these abilities together, and bursting and half bursting every minute and 2 minutes. Outside of that, when it comes to combo point building, you'll use Phantom Knives, even on a single target, just to consume the buff of Clear the Witness, since it generates more combo points and it's just very efficient. And outside of that, you'll be mostly using Mutilate or replacements for ambushes, which happens passively through a talent of Blindside, just giving you a different version of Mutilate that costs no energy but allows you to build combo points more efficiently. But since it replaces Mutilate, you don't need a full new keybind for it. And whenever bleeds don't need to be refreshed and slashing this up on a target, you'll basically be using the rest of your combo points on Envenom. When it comes to spending your combo points as Assassination Rogue, generally, you can start spending them as soon as you have 5 combo points or more. Unless you're playing Deathstalker, where you want to consume Envenom on a 7 combo points, so that means maximum, which means you will have to overdraw on your combo points a little bit in some cases, but it generally ends up being more worthwhile because you do need to reapply the Deathstalker's mark back to the target. So that is something you'll have to pay attention to when it comes to part of your buff management windows. But the playstyle of Assassination outside of managing cooldowns is very straightforward. Maintain bleeds and envenom the target when you don't need to maintain bleeds, consume Phantom Knives, and then synchronize your cooldowns together. Now, the button of Kingsbane does have a very specific uses for it. It is a very strong ability that does a ton of damage, a good portion of your overall damage output. But you want to find ways to synchronize it in the best ways possible. So to demonstrate how you would normally use the ability, at least when it comes to full raid encounters, we'll be running with 2 stacks of lightweight Shiv, which gives us 2 charges of Shiv ability. So we'll be using both of those Shivs, which empower our nature damage against the target. You'll want to try to make sure the Kingsbane ticks down during those Shiv windows. So to gain the maximum benefits out of Kingsbane, you'll basically try to make sure you bank up 2 charges of Shiv, but you're not really going to hold back using Kingsbane. Even if you don't have all those charges, you'll want to use Kingsbane on cooldown. You'll just have to hold back on using Shiv, synchronize it together with Kingsbane if your charges are available. But generally what that looks like is you'll shift the target with Envenom rolling, and you'll also use Kingsbane. And you'll want to make sure to use Shiv again when Kingsbane has about 8 seconds on its duration to make sure, since Kingsbane gains more damage towards the tail end of the ability, as you apply poisons to the target, it gains more damage. You want to make sure that those last few seconds of Kingsbane are empowered by Shiv so that it gains maximum value towards the tail end of the dot. And you'll want to do that while still going through the basic motions of your combat rotation, building combo points and spending them on Envenom. So you're not stopping your rotation just to watch for Kingsbane and Shivs, you're just combining them together, making sure to use them, and then weaving your combat rotations in between of refreshing your Shivs and refreshing your Kingsbane on the target. When maximizing Deathstalker playstyle, you only have to maintain a couple of things. 1, make sure you're using Clear the Witness buff. This is where a lot of rogues fall behind, is not maximizing Clear the Witness, because it grants you additional combo points and it's very efficient for the damage that it offers. So whenever you get to reapply Deathstalker's mark, you will have at least 1 charge of Clear the Witness, which allows your Phantom Knives to be a lot more effective. And outside of that, make sure you're playing around Darkest Night. Your capstone is one of the most important aspects of the spec, empowering your Envenoms greatly, but also allowing you to reapply Deathstalker's mark to the target so you continue the Deathstalker's mark gameplay loop that the whole hero spec revolves around. You have to try to maximize this as best as possible as a Deathstalker, and this is where a lot of players lose a lot of their overall damage, is not playing correctly around Deathstalker's Night just by not consuming the buff when it's available. Another optimization for Deathstalker that you can utilize is Lingering Darkness. After Death's mark expires, you gain 30 seconds of additional nature damage against the target. And while normally rogues are recommended to save their Shivs for Kingsbane windows, with Lingering Darkness while the buff is active, you are actually encouraged to use Shiv pretty aggressively. So even if you have charges that you normally would bank for Kingsbane, you actually want to use them pretty aggressively while the buff is available, only holding back charges of Shiv for your next Kingsbane window. only after the buff expires. The AoE and Cleave rotation for Assassination rogues isn't all that different. With the talent of Indiscriminate Carnage in our Mythic Plus build, we are able to apply a ton of bleed damage to multiple targets, spreading ruptures and corrodes evenly across multiple characters. You want to try to basically maintain 5 to 6 bleeds between corrode and rupture, because that is all you need for the Venomous Wounds talent. Otherwise, you're over-generating too much energy and don't really need more than 5 ruptures or 5 corrodes. It could be like 3 corrodes, 2 ruptures if you want to do it like that. Just you need 5 active bleeds that are either corrode or rupture on targets. Besides this, just like in single target, you will maintain Slice and Dice mostly through Envenoms, which you'll continue to use in single target. Though before you use Envenom, you will want to add the talent of Crimson Tempest to the rotation, and it should always be available whenever you're fighting against 2 or more targets as an Assassination rogue. Most of the times as Assassin, you will use Phantom Knives for combo point generation, but you will still want to use Mutilate just to maintain the buff of Caustic Spatter, which allows up poison damage to cleave to nearby targets. And you will continue to use your major cooldown buttons from Cold Blood, if it's talented, to Deathmark, Vanish Corrodes, Kingsbane Windows, because all those things are still going to cleave to multiple targets, and you'll just usually use them on a priority target, usually one that has the most health, or the deadliest enemy in the group that needs to be shut down as quickly as possible in most cases in Mythic Plus dungeons. Outside of this, like I said, build calm points with Phantom Knives unless you need to refresh Caustic Spatter, and then spend your calm points when Crimson Tempest does not need to be refreshed as an extra bleed on Envenoms, and those will cleave with Caustic Spatter. So Assassination AoE, it's kind of like you basically play single target, but you just replace Mutilate for the most part with Phantom Knives, as it's more effective at generating calm points, but you're mostly still using single target abilities, just you'll cleave to nearby foes. So single target and AoE is very similar to each other. You just have one extra debuff and a couple extra buffs to manage in AoE, but besides that, it basically has the same gameplay loop, where things like your Kingsbane windows will still need to be just the same in single target as they are in AoE. You'll still want to maximize those windows as best as possible, because Kingsbane and Caustic Spatter windows in AoE could deal a ton of group-wide damage while giving you a ton of focus damage to the strongest, toughest enemy in the pack, which ends up being super fun to play into Assassination. And then you combine those resets with Deathstalker's Mark for massive 100% guaranteed crit Envenoms on top of it, and this is where the spec really starts to shine and become really fun for many rogues out there. So to help your rotation get kick-started as Assassination rogue, we do have a couple of openers that you can utilize. First one being a pure single target opener that you can use in raid content. Normally as a Deathstalker rogue, you'll open up with an ambush followed by a garrote to build up some calm points, and then go into a rupture to at least set up all of your bleeds, followed by Phantom Knives to consume the Clear the Witness buff, or Mutilate if you don't have access to Phantom Knives as of the moment. And once you build up enough calm points for an Envenom, usually 5 or more, once we use Envenom, we could proceed with our Burst combo, where we use our unused trinkets and any potions that we have available into a Deathmark, Shiv, Kingsbane, and then from there we continue to generate calm points, usually with Mutilates or free ambushes, into Envenoms. But you will have to generate up to 7 calm points if you do get the Darkest Night proc at that point. So that is something you'll have to maintain, but you basically generate and dump as many Envenoms as you can while spamming Mutilates, making sure to reshiv during the last 8 seconds of your Kingsbane to maintain the debuff, and potentially even cast a Thistle Tea to gain more energy so you can continue dumping calm points into finishers into the target, making sure to go for a Vanish Garrote during the tail end of your Deathmark to make sure you get the fully empowered version of Garrote coming out of your major cooldowns. And then from there, you can just go back to your normal rotation of building and spending calm points while still playing around the gameplay loop that Deathstalker offers with Phantom Knives procs, as well as the big calm point Envenoms. Now when it comes to your AoE opener, since we are able to cleave Garrotes and ruptures to multiple targets, that's exactly what we'll do. We'll still open up with the ambush just to get the whole Deathstalker gameplay loop started, but then we'll start garroting and rupturing and spreading it to at least 5 or 6 targets, which is about all you need for energy. Build a couple calm points, and you can even use Garrotes pretty aggressively to build calm points in the opener, just because they can cleave on multiple targets, and then maintain a Crimson Tempest at the very beginning. Build calm points, and by then you'll probably have an Envenom that's ready to be consumed by Darkest Night, so you might as well send it inside of your Death Mark window instead of outside of it. Deathstalker's Mark, pop all your cooldowns with any unused potions you got. Kingsbane, and then start building and spending comp points, mostly focusing on Envenoms, making sure to mutilate your priority target that's marked by Deathstalker's mark, so that that damage cleaves to multiple targets. And then you'll continue to mostly dump your comp points into Envenoms on that target, but also making sure to refresh Crimson Tempest if it's about to fall off. And remember, you can use Vanish to reapply the Cleave, Corrode, Cleave, Rupture to re-bleed multiple targets as you're about to exit outside of your big burst window. And that's basically how you get started when it comes to your opener in AoE and Mythic Plus content. Next, let's go over regarding how to gear your rogue heading into the brand new season. And I highly recommend that you should start utilizing, especially if you're looking to take your rogue a little more seriously for Season 2, start utilizing the Raidbot's SimBot add-on, which will help you sim the character, which is going to allow you to compare various items to find out which ones are going to be your biggest upgrade. I will give you some general direction when it comes to what gear, what items, what stats you want to prioritize on your rogue, but using Raidbots to help you get some of the best results for your character through sims generally helps you get a little more accuracy and squeeze out a bit more damage out of your character, and it's definitely worth getting the add-on and trying at least the free version in order to help optimize your character between the items in your inventory. But generally, as Assassination Rogue, your best stats for the season is going to be agility, so any item that grants you more agility in most cases usually is an upgrade. Outside of that, your priority is going to be critical strikes, which gives you more damage but also more comp point generation, so it ends up being a very effective stat, which is very close but only slightly ahead of master, which increases the damage of your bleeds, and poisons, which is where majority of your damage comes from, followed by haste, which isn't as necessary. My current setup for gear is not optimal for that, but haste is not nearly as good of a stat as mastery or crit, and versatility ends up being your worst stat, so it's one you generally would like to avoid as an Assassination Rogue unless you push like some really high Mythic Plus dungeons where you need some defense from the versatility that you can gain. I also do want to talk about some of the best install items for the spec and go over the tier set. The tier set for Assassination did get improved, but it's for the most part very passive. All rogues who play around the tier set a winning streak, where your damage and abilities have a chance to grant you a buff of winning streak, and for Assassination, stacks of winning streak increase the damage of your Envenom, Rupture, and Crimson Tempest by 3%, stacking up to 10 times potentially. Envenom, Rupture, and Crimson Tempest all have a 15% chance to remove winning streaks, so you got like this Goblin Gambler dice type of a tier set, which is very thematic for this raid tier. With your 4 set, whenever you lose a winning streak, you have a chance, I think roughly 66% chance right now, that got buffed up by quite a bit recently, to instead gain maximum stacks of winning streak instead of losing them, while also getting full empowered version of that bonus instead, making you immune to the removal. So the tier set is very passive. You don't have to actually play around it rotationally. It just is a damage buff that generally, with some of the changes recently, ends up being a little bit more consistent than it was at the start of the season, but it's just a very RNG tier set that we don't really get to affect too much. Outside of that though, some of your best trinkets from this raid or this season is going to come mostly from the new raid, one of them being IF Kazan, which is a best slot trinket as a passive option, which comes from the final boss, Chrome King Galawix. You'll also want to use an unused trinket to combine together with your Deathmark window. So generally any trinket that's about on a 2-minute cooldown ends up being highly efficient. From the raid, we have the House of Cards, which is a 1.5-minute trinket, not quite a 2-minute trinket, but it still grants you quite a bit of additional mastery that can synergize pretty well with your Deathmark window. The other trinket that's also pretty efficient for the brand new season of Mythic Plus Dungeons comes from the Pyre of the Sacred Flame. And that trinket is going to be Signet of the Priory. Couldn't remember which boss it drops off of, but Signet of Priory is a 2-minute trinket that allows you to amplify your best or highest secondary stat, which ends up synergizing pretty well since it's exactly perfectly lined up with your Deathmark window to increase your overall effectiveness, and that's another suitable alternative for the House of Cards trinket. Besides this, when it comes to the ring department, we still are going to be using Cersei's Circlet heading to this tier, and we are going to be optimizing Cersei's Circlet with the citrines of Stormbringers, as well as Fathom Dwellers and Legendary Skippers in all content, whether it's Mythic Plus or raids, as this trinket right now actually ends up simming to roughly about 700 item level, which makes it better than some of the other rings that you can achieve for this season. When it comes to crafting items, you do want 2 crafted pieces, one of them being a dagger that will go into your main hand or possibly your offhand if you get a higher item level version, which means that your weapon is basically secured and you can craft one heading into this brand new season. All you need are the necessary quests to be able to craft this item, which you should be able to create pretty early into the season if you could dive into some of the more difficult Mythic Plus dungeons. +7s is the minimum that you need to spam out at the start of the season. The weapon you're looking for is an Ever Forged Stabber, and you'll upgrade it with the new sparks available for the season, and you'll also want to make sure to embellish it with the right secondary stats, being Critical Strike and Mastery. The most important thing you'll want a weapon for is with the embellishment of Darkmoon Sigil Ascension, which grants you random secondary stats. This is a Nerubian specific embellishment, and we'll be prioritizing the Nerubian specific embellishment and empowering it with our second crafted item. Your second crafted item will be Rune Branded Kickers. This item is going to be one of the better ones because there's a lot of other belts and bracers and other slots that have the stats we're looking for, but there's not a lot of boots that have crit mastery and swaths. So we'll mostly be utilizing the Rune Branded Kickers with the best secondary stats for your embellishment, which is also going to be your crit and mastery. But for the embellishment this time around, we're actually going to be going with the Writhing Armor Banding, which is an embellishment that doesn't really do anything, but it does amplify the effectiveness of your other Nerubian embellishments, which is your dagger, getting both positives and the negative effects of it. So we'll be combining those two together to make that dagger effect even stronger than before, and those will be ideally the crafted items you'll be running for Season 2. Next, we have our enchants and consumables. For the weapon enchant, we'll be running Authority of Depths for pure single target content, but you can always run with the Radiant if you're going to be doing Mythic Plus for Season 2 instead. For cloak, we'll go usually with Chant of Winged Grace. For chest, Crystalline Radiance. Bracers with Armored Avoidance. Legs with Stormbound Armor Kit. Boots with Defender's March for additional stamina. Rings regularly with Critical Strike, since that seems to be the best stat going forward, or potentially Haste if you are behind on Haste as a stat, but you'll need to sim your character in the raid bots in order to figure out the best enchants for your character. When it comes to your consumables, we'll for the most part be using flasks of Alchemical Chaos, or you can go with a flask of Aggression for Critical Strike, but Alchemical Chaos generally tends to be better because crit is not our only good stat. Mastery and even haste to some degree can be good, and with Alchemical Chaos we get a much bigger variation of those secondary stats, which generally ends up being better. For Common Potion, we'll be using a Temper Potion or Algari Healing Potion if you need defenses. For weapon buffs, usually Ironclaw Whetstone, Augment Ruin if you can afford it. Those can definitely be expensive at the start of a season. Food, Feast of the Midnight Masquerade, Diamond, the Culminating Blasphemite, and Gems, usually Masterful Ruby, to apply for our secondary stats. But also you could sim those in case you need to figure out if you need different secondary stats, or let's say you have too much crit, not enough mastery. You can always adjust those secondary stats through sims alone. As always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this guide. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community where we can read the written version of the guide, which I'll keep updated with any of the newest changes or new builds if we get any major hotfixes for the class of Rogue in the future. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in our next one.